the great irony of the popular conception of science as arrogant is that when you go to a scientific meeting, you don't see arrogance. I mean, you're about as likely to see real arrogance as you're likely to see nudity at a scientific conference. I mean, this is people are constantly offering caveats and hedges toward what they say. Every statement is couched in, I'm sure there's someone in the room who knows more about this than me, but because everyone is desperate to avoid public embarrassment. Now, this seems to be something you're not doing.
If I was worried about being embarrassed, I wouldn't be actually influencing the people that I'm influencing. And I can also say something right now is that I agree that, science is about a very specific methodology. But for people like Michael, not you so much, but people like Michael, to take all of inner experience, all of the rich inner experience, and try to codify it in a graph with data is absurd.
As opposed to what? Just calling it fuzzy words? How does that help us understand
That's such an out, Michael. That's such an out.
And one
use the words fuzzy,
all right.
Use the words woo-woo, and you're out of the argument.
I'll give you a technical explanation. When you talk about the observer effect and the uncertainty principle, this is how subatomic particles are altered by looking at them, by bombarding them with light, for example, because they're so small. And so you look at it or you don't look at it, and that changes the nature of what you're looking at. But the moon is really there whether you look at it or not. It doesn't apply to the macro world.
In the absence of a conscious entity, the moon remains a radically ambiguous and ceaselessly flowing quantum soup.
Deepak,
that you have to have a conscious being.
The moon?
Yes.
Okay, listen to the sounds in the room.
Wait, I want to hear the sounds of Jean.
Because, I'm listening as a woman. And as a woman, I'm getting a somewhat different perspective on this, because one of the things we're talking about, does God have a future? Well, one of the things is you look at who is really addressing this. The world is changing. This is the most interesting time in human history. I realize other times thought they were it. They're wrong. This is it. This is the time in which, what we do in our lifetime could profoundly make a difference as to whether we grow or die, or whether the 13.7 billion year experiment that has resulted in our sitting on this stage could be over within this next century. There are factors that are unique in human history happening now. One of them, I believe, and that really address this question. One of them has to do with the rise of women, slowly but surely, with a whole lot of backlash, to full partnership with men in the whole domain of human affairs. Now, being a woman, I would have to say that part of that mindset, and I find this with women all over the world, is an emphasis more on process rather than on product, on making things cohere, develop, and grow. The very fact that the world mind is taking a walk with itself, that we're receiving not just the harvest of many different scientific points of view, but also the wisdom traditions that you have studied so deeply, Sam, the wisdom traditions and the spiritual meta-technologies and processes of many different cultures and states of mind.
But Jean, I'm sorry, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I would be fascinated to hear where you stand on the fight that the men have been having here about whether you can muster any convincing proof or evidence to support the contention that there is an intelligence at the heart of the universe, or something more than this.
You are the proof.
What does that mean?
I think
Even Michael is the proof.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
What do you think about that?
Well, you see, I come from a very different perspective. My perspective is philosophical, as well as being an activist in social change. My work is human development in the light of social change. If this kind of conversation can lead to a deepening of our understanding of our human condition, And then that deepening can bring forth greater radical empathy, love, understanding, so that we don't have, the apocalypse of different cultures really killing each other, as you've written about so beautifully. Then I think that we're going somewhere. Ultimately, I think that God has a future. I'm not sure of the human race, having this future.
What is the future of God, in your opinion? And is it a constructive future?
I think, from what I'm seeing, I think we are moving personally toward a planetary civilization with high individuation of culture, in which I would hope that the spiritual sensibility, which I find in people literally all over the world, could prevail over a particular archaic religiosity, and that would be part of the future of God.
So, Michael, you have been... let's just say, dismissive of what Deepak has said thus far about the notion that there is something more than this. How can you be so sure that there isn't? And I know it's hard to prove a negative, if not impossible. But give me some evidence to support your contention that this is it.
Well, for example, I can't prove that there isn't something else that I don't know that there isn't. Huh? I mean, it's like the difference between something invisible and something non-existent. Well, it's zero and we can't study it. But if you take something specific like Gene's excellent comment there, we actually have a pretty good scientific understanding now based on evolutionary theory and evolutionary psychology that if you expand the circle of sentiments to include other people as honorary members of your tribe, you're less likely to kill them. And so, like, for example, tried and true game theory kind of data in the real world of opening up economic borders, you're less likely to bomb countries that make your cars and computers. That's a form of trade that makes you feel like somebody else is an honorary member of your tribe. Well, that has very deep evolutionary reasons that we've now come to understand in just the last few decades by applying the methods of science to something with a real social consequences. And we can derive that from data and tests and game theory models and so forth. So just in terms of what we can operationally define carefully so that we're all talking about the same thing and then go measure it or test it or experiment with it or try it. I mean, one of the great things about democracy, liberal democracy, it's kind of a scientific experiment. Let's try this, let's try that. This state has this taxation system, this one has that taxation system. It's like an experiment. And so I think what you described, Gene, as the expanding circle of sentiments to include women is a result of the Enlightenment experiment that let's try that. Let's see if that produces greater prosperity and wealth and happiness and joy for more people in more places, and it worked. And that's a rational, reasonable approach.
One thing I'd like to add to that is I think it's ironic to score women's rights for your side of the ledger here in this conversation, because there's been no greater obstacle to empowering women in human history than religion. Certainly the three monotheists. I mean, when you...
Sam, to my ear at least, neither Gene nor Deepak is advocating religion as you understand it.
That's true, and that's why I said what I said at the beginning. That the issue here, I mean, what kind of conversation should we have, and how will this conversation be construed by people in the audience, by people seeing this on television? And the reality is that the kind of talk and the kind of invocations of science that Deepak is offering here is received by a great number of people who believe a lot of unjustified, very myth-laden stuff that has been handed down to us.
You're making that statement without qualifying it, without giving any proof of it. Give me some proof that what I'm saying is what he says is woo-woo, just because he can't understand it.
Okay.
Every discipline has its vocabulary.
It's okay. If you're going to say that non-locality is an operable principle in neuroscience, that is woo-woo right now in neuroscience.
It's a principle in morphogenesis and differentiation. It's a principle in the workings of the pacemaker of your heart, where 100 pacemaker cells fire simultaneously,
it's not
non-locally.
Saying it louder and relentlessly is not going to make it true.